Hi kids, I have a new title sequence. So this video I'm going to be talking about movies that you almost certainly haven't seen, but I think you should because they're awesome. The reason I'm making this list is because I see other people have made similar lists, but the movies on their list are movies that are really quite mainstream and everyone's seen, so hopefully on this list there'll be things which are a bit more obscure and films that you almost certainly haven't seen and should be good recommendations for you if you like to try things that are a little bit different than Hollywood pumps out. The first film on my list is a film called Alice by Czech director Jan Svankmajer. It was made in 1988 and it's an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. And I think, to my taste, it's certainly the best one. Now, I'm kind of a Jan Svankmajer fanboy and I like everything that he's ever done. But this film is probably my favourite of his films. It's the first one I ever saw, and not only that, it's probably his best. So if you are a fan of Alice in Wonderland or Alice Through the Looking Glass, Lewis Carroll in general, and you're also a fan of unusual films with a mixture of live action and animated things interacting with each other, it's really, really worth seeing. I'd check it out. The next film on my list is called Sound of My Voice. It's a 2011 film, both written and starring new person Brit Marling, demonstrating that she is definitely somebody to watch for the future. It basically follows the story of two journalists who infiltrate a cult, and it starts off as a kind of psychological drama and becomes, by the end of it, a very interesting sci-fi. When I'm trying to explain to people what sci-fi, in my opinion, should be, rather than spaceships blowing each other up in too much special effects, I would point them towards Sound of My Voice to show them what sci-fi could be, should be, and it's definitely worth watching. I haven't watched the follow-up film, The East, yet, although it's not a sequel, but it is about journalists infiltrating a group. It's also written by Brit Marling. This film was originally supposed to be part of a trilogy that was planned out to be a 3-movie story. So the ending of this film, some people find its ambiguity unsettling or irritating, and if you have a problem with ambiguous endings, then maybe the ending of the film might not be for you. But I would say that the ambiguity of the ending perfectly suits the subject matter. The director has said that the first film did not get enough viewers to warrant making the second and third, which I think is a terrible shame. So if you can up the amount of people that have seen the first film, you should do, because even if they never make a second and third film, it on its own stands up as a great psychological thriller / sci-fi awesomeness. The next film I'm going to talk about is a film that I hesitated to put on the list because it's slightly less obscure than the other ones on it, maybe. It's a live action film called Ichi the Killer, which was made in 2001 by Takeshi Miike, who's a kind of quite well-known director because he directed the incredibly dull Audition that lots of people seem to like for some mad reason, and a bunch of other movies which some of them have been really good, some of them have been really bad, and so on. But this movie, I think, is probably his best movie. It certainly is the one which is most expressive of an interesting style as opposed to just pointing a camera at people, framing up and going. It's an incredibly violent film. In fact, it's probably the most violent film I've ever seen in my whole life. And the first time you watch it, you'll probably be, like me, a little, like that. But on the second time you view it, once you're a little desensitised to that level of ultra-violence, you start to see it for what it is, and that is a very funny, dark comedy. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, because if you really cannot tolerate the sight of violence, tongues being cut off, people being scalded with hot oil, all sorts of vile mutilations, if you cannot stomach that and if the idea of that sounds horrible to you, then probably you shouldn't watch it. But if you feel like you could get past that, it's definitely worth watching, because it's very interesting visually. The editing style is really original, and the soundtrack is really good as well. So why not go out and watch it today if you haven't already, which you probably have because it's not that obscure, I accept. The next film I'll talk about is a film that seems to have been seen by no one except for me. Every time I talk about it to any of my friends who fancy themselves as film buffs, they have not heard of it at all. It's a film called The Possession of David O'Reilly. It's a 2010 British horror movie, and it's filmed in a kind of almost found footagey kind of documentary style, but with the cameras mostly up very close to the actors. It's not a found footage film. In my opinion, those have been kind of overdone, and it's not like that. But it does have a kind of scratchy realism to the way that it's filmed, that some viewers may find a little irritating, but I thought it really added to the claustrophobia of it. It is set only in one house, and it only has 3 characters in it, which means that there can't, by the nature of that, there cannot be a lot of violence and gore, because they quickly run out of the 3 people that they have. What it lacks in violence and other things, it makes up for it in an incredibly unsettling tone that's very reminiscent of the Silent Hill video games. In fact, it's almost like the best non-Silent Hill movie ever made. If you compare it to a film which I thought was very dull, like Paranormal Activity, which blames a lot of its limitations on the fact that it's got an incredibly low budget, this film, The Possession of David O'Reilly, will show you what can be done with a similar budget and make it far more interesting, far more unsettling, and just a generally much better film. This film is also sometimes known as The Torment, so if you're looking for it online, you could also look up that name. It may be more difficult to find in America, but it really shouldn't be, because it's really good. The next film I'll talk about is a film called Mad Detective. It's a Hong Kong psychological thriller from 2007 that takes the normal trope that they often have in detective things, they have since Sherlock Holmes, of the detective, the Sherlock-like character, being somewhat unusual in his perspective, and they've taken that and they've cranked it up so that he is, in this case, actually mad, but his madness is useful for him in solving the crimes that he's attempting to. It's got funny bits, sad bits, and it's also an interesting detective story. So if you don't mind subtitles, you should give this one a go, because it's really good. The last film I'm going to talk about is a film called Cassian Han, which I think is an adaptation of a manga, which I've never read or seen or had anything to do with. It was made in 2004, and it's almost live action. Almost. This film I wouldn't recommend to everyone, really. I almost didn't include it on the list. When I first saw it, I thought it was horrible. But somehow I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept seeing the images from it and wondering what they meant. And so I watched it again, and then again, and again, and again, and I've seen this film probably around 7 times, and somehow, something in it I really like. I can't necessarily put my finger on it, but it's very hooky. It sticks hooks in you, and you can't get it out of your system. At least that's how it was for me. The film is incredibly special effects heavy, in the sense that I don't think there's a single scene where the background isn't green screened in. Almost like Sin City uses that kind of special effects to create an atmosphere, so does this. Not the same atmosphere as Sin City, I mean, it's not like black and white and stuff. but I think it uses that sort of CGI heaviness to create this very strange, dreamlike kind of feel. The plot is in many ways an absolute mess, and I hesitate to even describe it, but there is something about it, so give it a go. Maybe you'll hate it, but maybe like me, you'll eventually learn to love it. Honourable mentions, these are films which I thought you probably haven't seen, but at the same time, for one reason or another, I decided not to include on this list. The first one is Triangle, the 2009 British-made horror movie set on a boat. I remember when I saw this, I thought it was really, really good. I haven't seen it again since. I don't know why. I've got it on DVD. I just haven't got round to watching it again. And I don't know it well enough to recommend it, as I've only watched it once. And sometimes when you watch a film once, you think that it was really good, and you watch it again and you realise it was terrible. I don't think that's the case, but I don't remember it well enough to really give a proper, full, wholehearted recommendation for this film. That's why I didn't include it. But you could still check it out if you wanted. It's called, Triangle, as I said. The next film is a film called Gwemel, or The Host, not to be confused with the Twilight-y whatever one. This is a Korean film, and I won't talk about it now because I've talked about it before on my other videos, and I'll probably end up talking about it again. The other films that I will not talk about in this video are the films of Stephen Chow, who's a Hong Kong director and writer and star. The reason I'm not talking about any of his films in this list, although there's tons you probably haven't seen and are really good, is because he's so good that I'm probably going to do a video devoted especially to him and his films. The next one on the honourable mentions list is a film called The Man Behind the Mask. It's a American horror movie, but it's sort of an indie movie, and it's got a twist on the genre of a sort of 80s slasher, but you see it from the perspective of the killer, and it sort of uses some clever writing to explain the sort of normal standard plot holes and things that can occur in traditional 80s horror. It's well worth a see. I didn't include it on this list because I don't know how obscure it is. I've never really talked to anyone about it, so I don't know how many people have seen it and how many people haven't. So I don't know whether it's one that is an obscure gem that I've found or everyone knows about it, so that's why I didn't include that. And the final film is a film called Ink. I think it's British as well. It's extremely unusual, also very special effects heavy, in a similar way to Cassian Han, not quite so special effects heavy as Cassian Han, but I almost don't know if I like it. It has some really, really cool bits, and it's a really cool vision, and it's amazing and ambitious, and successful in one sense that they managed to pull this off on such a low budget in Britain. Except I still don't know if I think it's either brilliant or it's mediocre. It's not terrible, so that's why I kind of wouldn't advise it necessarily. But if you want to check it out, you can. So anyway, that's my list. Bye.